He had the support of some of the thinkers and writers that nourished his critique of conventional schooling. But Jeff didn't know, and I'm sure his parents didn't know, what would happen if he left high school without graduating and getting a diploma. The road turned out to be less rough than I thought it would be, Jeff told me when we got together to talk last week. And he's going to tell you some about the interesting terrain of that road. But still, I think that today we are celebrating the courage that Jeff and his family showed in taking that first step when they really had no idea how things would turn out. So you can wonder, as that student in Alfie Cohn's audience did, what else there is besides that expected path and expected goal, or you can decide that the path and the goal is yours to determine. In the words of the social justice activist Miles Horton, you can make the road by walking. This is what Jeff Napolitano began to do when he left high school, and what he continues to do today as coordinator of the Western Massachusetts office of the American Friends Service Committee. This is the kind of courage and daring that Northstar celebrates, and we are very proud to honor Jeff Napolitano with the 9th Annual Self-Directed Learning Award. Exemplifying the idea that learning is natural, but school is optional.
Thank you very much to the people of Northstar for this award. It's a little bit overwhelming. If you had told me 18 years ago that I would be getting an award in front of my parents for dropping out of high school, I would have insisted that you share whatever hallucinating drugs you were on. So, some background is probably needed here. I have the honor for working for AFSC. My job description is a blessed one. I work to push back on what I believe are the broken and dangerous systems of our society. From a draconian immigration system, to opposing nuclear weapons and power, to the wars abroad that have gone on for more than a decade. I also regularly visit local high schools to try to counter the recruitment of youth for military service. It is this brokenness of our educational system and the problems with compulsory education that caused me to drop out of school, but more on that in a moment. At the end of 11th grade at Waltham High School, I dropped out. I was tired of school, I had read enough to know better, and I knew several people who demonstrated that leaving high school might not ruin one's life forever, as had been suggested to me. I loosely attended an underfunded alternative school, essentially a poor man's version of Northstar, for about 8 months while working part-time for a small online company. I decided that living in my parents' house was not a viable long-term solution, and I applied and was accepted into Boston University, as it was the only way that I could trick my parents for paying for me to move out of the house. So after a couple of years, I dropped out of BU, and I went on to work full-time at a software company where I was interning. After several years, when the company was bought out, I decided to go back to college to finish that elusive degree. So I went to UMass Amherst, and I graduated for the first time. Hold on, there's more. I was on a roll, so I entered graduate school, but after a year and a half of that, I dropped out of it. So I stand before you, a 3-time dropout. The challenge is on, Northstar. Next year, y'all gonna find somebody who's dropped out 4 times. I recently visited Northstar during an open house, and I heard from a few of the current students. The stories they recounted were so familiar, and that familiarity was something that I hadn't felt in a very long time, about 17 years in fact. My visit made me feel envious as well. I envied those people who now have Northstar as a resource available to them, and a little jealous that they have a much clearer and well-supported alternative to school. Frankly, I dropped out of school because going to school, compulsory school, is a damaging endeavor for some, maybe most, and it can be damaging to the people who participate as both students and teachers. For parents who try to mitigate the situation, it is awkward to say the least and just as damaging at the most. It's based upon a system of production that does not benefit the people who produce. It's an old system. The way school that operated when I was there is the same way that it operated 50 years ago. So it's an antiquated system. It's a system that wears out its participants. And so needless to say, when I left school, I was thoroughly worn out. I was worn out for a few reasons. I have to say the biggest was just dragging my teenage butt out of bed every morning and going to school so groggy. My mother can attest to waking me up repeatedly every morning. Almost all of my memories of school exist within this haze of physical exhaustion. I had help leaving school, however. As a teenager, I worked in the local public library, and I attended a weekend program for high school students at MIT. So I had books and I had resources available to me. Those resources, that help was largely through the authors Jonathan Kozol, Grace Llewellyn, and John Taylor Gatto. Gatto's Dumbing Us Down was a revolutionary book for me. It was revolutionary in that it simply pointed out things that were common sense, which is something so uncommon we should start calling it something else. I dropped out of school because it just doesn't work, at least not for some people. Have you ever tried to learn Latin in 40-minute segments? Or chess? Or anything worth learning? I have, and it was excruciatingly frustrating, and I actually did well in my schoolwork. Common sense tells us that the act of learning is not something that can be easily boxed into identically spaced time periods. I feel, in general, that our world, our society, needs less systems of authority and less systems of control, not more. I remember once missing a test because I thought I was supposed to be in orchestra. The teacher refused to let me back into the classroom to take the test, and as a result of missing it, I couldn't get better than a B in her class for that whole year. But the thing that I recall so vividly is her bitterness, her anger about having her authority challenged. It affected her profoundly. And then there was the teacher who sobbed in front of the class when she felt she lost control. And the history teacher, who was so tightly wound, we used to wonder how he managed to not have a heart attack until he had a heart attack. I remember these people vividly, and I remember thinking that there was something about that place that engendered such a bitterness and frailty not only in its students, but in its teachers too. For me, school was not a place that prioritized maturity, compassion, and certainly not learning. So thankfully there was Northstar, and thankfully there were young people who had the courage to reject schooling. There were likely many criticisms of Northstar. I saw doubt in the faces of some of the parents who visited during open house. It's not a perfect place. It's not a paradise where every student leaves to become a Harvard scholar. Students who reject school face an uncertainty about their future, about how they'll shape their lives in a very unorthodox fashion, at least in the short term. Facing that uncertainty is scary, can be scary. But facing it also engenders maturity, a maturity that only comes with breathing free. Northstar is, I think, in part a detox center to get this system of control out of our bones and out of our minds. It is a place to do, among other things, nothing. Just nothing. Because once you've grown regimented for so long, since you were a small child, it takes a while to get that out of your system. But eventually, you learn how to once again breathe freely. I'm fortunate enough to have worked with 3 alums of Northstar. Mishy Liebling and I met while we were at UMass. She was a fellow undergrad. We were both non-traditional students. And we raised a bit of hell in student government and political organizing. We both went on to grad school at UMass into labor studies. I dropped out, but she graduated, and she's continuing to raise hell, organizing hotel workers with the labor union Unite Here. The other Northstar alum I know is Emily Andres, who interned with AFSC. At 15, Emily was the youngest Human Rights Commissioner in Northampton, and it was the youngest intern in my office. She was also one of the most mature and politically astute people that I've ever encountered in my time at AFSC. For example, her fury at having an enormous military contractor take root in our home city of Northampton translated into a tangible, practical good. A well-researched report that we released when Medea Benjamin, an international activist in Code Pink, came to town. That report that she co-authored has been read by hundreds of people in Western Massachusetts. I've just found out recently that Marcella Jane who has worked with the coalition Springfield No One Leaves, is an alum of Northstar. Marcella's work has consisted of helping folks stave off foreclosure and eviction during the financial crisis. She did this as a mother and a college student to boot, so that should give you a sense of the extraordinary character of people who have been involved in Northstar. The common thread that runs through Mishi, Emily, and Marcella's personality, and I imagine other Northstar graduates, and hopefully myself, is a refusal to allow the status quo to go unchanged. I do know that these three women are mature beyond their years, and they possess a sense of groundedness that I find missing in many adults. They are a force for change, with a solid grasp of the feasible and the reasonable, which makes them some of my favorite people. So praise Northstar. I think many folks view it as an alternative or a cure. I view Northstar as a revolutionary institution. Any institution that breaks the continuation of the status quo is to be celebrated. Northstar is where we detox, it's where we remove the shackles of regimentation, and we begin taking in those free breaths. And no matter what we do afterwards, no matter what we work for, we do it as children who found a better way to learn and live. So praise Northstar, and thank you so very much for this day.